Do you know, it's really funny. I've been umming and ahhing, putting my camera at different angles of the room, and I'm umming and ahhing whether I prefer this particular angle than I have been doing the past few videos. It's really bizarre. There's no easy way to say this. This is actually my second attempt at doing this particular video. I did very recently, earlier on today, do this video, but the fate of the gods, for whatever reason they may or may not have, felt it best that I didn't upload this particular review for some reason or another. I've just been literally facing technical difficulty after technical difficulty, so this is my second attempt at making this video. So, who said second time's a charm? Anyway, now this is going to be really bizarre for me because everything I'm going to bring up to you now, to the viewer, I've already talked about. But I'll do it again anyway. I don't mind doing it again. This is why I do it. If I didn't enjoy what I were doing, I wouldn't do it. It's as plain as simple as that. Now, a friend of mine previously stated to me that he enjoyed my videos. You know, I like always, I appreciate any feedback. And he also advised me that maybe my reviews shouldn't be as long. He wasn't necessarily a complaint, but basically he was saying, you know, they're a little bit too long for his particular taste anyway. And, you know, don't misinterpret what I'm saying. I do genuinely value his friendship. He's a very dear friend of mine. And like all advice and all criticism, I do genuinely take on board. And I did give it some strong contemplation. However, the conclusion I withdrew from that eventually is I would feel, no matter what I was reviewing, whether it be in Doctor Who or any type of film or any other television series, I would feel if I didn't get my point across, no matter how long it takes, it would just feel like I were doing it a disservice. It wouldn't feel. I wouldn't feel like I'd be justifying that particular said franchise or whatever I just would be happen to be reviewing. So that being said, I don't intend for these reviews to be long or short. I write the notes. I discuss whatever I feel is appropriate to discuss to give whatever particular episode, film I'm reviewing to get the thorough, just review it deserves to the best of my ability. I do this because, one, I enjoy doing it. Two, it's a bit of fun. And three, I like always, I hope I give some positive insight to whoever just happens to be watching. But obviously, if you find these particular reviews too long, obviously there are other reviewers that might be to your vice. I can only try to the best of my capability to satisfy as many people as I can. No sexual innuendo intended there for those with a dirty mind. Now then, second time's a charm. Let's talk about one of the many things I love, Doctor Who. Now then, I think it's, before we go down this road and I review this particular episode, I feel it's important to bring up the history of the show, quite specifically the late 80s of this said show. Now, the 80s was an extremely turbulent time for Doctor Who, even more so with its relationship with its audience. As time went on, especially within the late 80s, you know, it was quite obvious that the budget that Doctor Who had in the late 80s, it was never going to be able to compete with other shows that were just coming out in the late 80s, especially in America, with Star Trek, with CBS's Star Trek The Next Generation and other shows of this caliber. And it was quite obvious with the budget the BBC were providing to make Doctor Who, it was pretty obvious that they would never have the capability, as sadly as it was, to compete with upcoming shows of that time. And when you look back from that perspective, you have to put into consideration, was it an appropriate time for Doctor Who to have that break and have the long, substantial break it had? And you got to question, did it need to have that break to have a completely fresh look by the time it came back in 2005, barring obviously the brief return it had and brief success it enjoyed in 1996 with the Paul McGann's portrayal of the Doctor. Feel free to look that up, because it is, I recommend that particular TV movie to anyone. However, that being said, you look at any episode, no matter how widely celebrated it is, or no matter how widely enjoyed it is, you look at any particular episode within Doctor Who within the 80s, and then you look at any particular episode in the 70s, storyline notwithstanding, you just judge it based on solely on a special effects perspective. And it is quite apparent that the technology to provide the special effects for the show was completely stagnant. And for whatever reason, probably because the BBC just didn't have that sort of money anyway, it was quite obvious that they were never going to be prepared to give Doctor Who the budget it would need to look like a good show, to give that audience that believability in terms of special effects. That was never going to happen. So sadly, during Sylvester McCoy's tenure, it looked very aged, and it looked very, again, I keep using that word, stagnant, but it looked very backward, to be quite frank. So sadly, in 1989, with its last ever episode, it eventually got cancelled. And like I just previously stated, notwithstanding its brief return in 1996 on the Paul McGann's portrayal of the Doctor, for almost 16 or 17 years, we was without Doctor Who. Until 2005, and people... It has been widely known, and people have actually called him the godfather of Doctor Who, because people need to put into consideration, people who know me on a personal basis will know that how much I celebrate the writer Russell T Davies. And not because of his contribution to Doctor Who, although that is, I will admit, that is the sole defined contributing factor to why I personally like Russell T Davies, although I am aware of his other contributions and I have also enjoyed his other writing. So not just because of that, Russell T Davies was essentially he's widely known as the godfather of Doctor Who, because he masterminded its return in 2005. He masterminded who was going to play the Doctor for its hopefully triumphant return. From that perspective, then he masterminded the story arcs for season 1 up to season 4, and basically, you know, he had to choose who was going to play the Doctor. And more importantly, like I was just previously stating, he had to find alternative ways how the show would adapt to appeal to a completely new and completely fresh audience, while simultaneously, you know, keeping the old audience that has remained ever faithful throughout the Doctor Who franchise, keeping them happy. And I feel he maintained an excellent balance of still having that, adding a new dimension to the show, so it looks appealing and has a new, for lack of a better terminology, just looks modern. He had to find alternative ways to modernise the show, to obviously attract a new audience, while simultaneously basically trying to get the older generation that remembered the show from way back when to keep them on the seats. And I feel he maintained a good balance in doing so. Also, I'd like to bring up as well, Now, as much as I love David Tennant, and I always say, you know, he's the go-to Doctor for me. He's my favourite Doctor of all time. I do feel, however, if I had to be brutally honest, if Doctor Who returned and just started off with David Tennant, I genuinely believe it wouldn't have the same effect it did have under Christopher Eccleston's tenure portrayal as the Doctor in season 1, because I feel as though it played a part in the audience's subconscious mind in the fact that this character wasn't just some guy and you know, just some weirdo. He wasn't some alien from a million miles away, which essentially obviously the character was. But basically the point I'm trying to make is he gave you the feel, he gave you the impression, as you would watch this particular TV show every Saturday night, he gave you the impression that anybody could be the Doctor. And I'm not talking in terms of obviously going in a wooden police box and travelling through time and space. I don't necessarily mean that. I mean in terms of having the same morality as the Doctor has. And to quote a particular episode later on in this series, which I will get to, you know, it's not about letting things happen. It's about making a stand. And I felt Doctor Who, this is why I love this particular show, is it teaches you to make a stand and always stand up for what you believe in. And I remember at the time when I was 11 years old, from the perspective of 11 years old, I was just genuinely getting into Doctor Who. And I heard that Doctor Who was just coming back. It was so bizarre. I know it sounds like far-fetched, but it was genuinely coincidental. I had a thing about going through phases and obsessions when I was a kid. And I was going through a Doctor Who phase just when I heard Doctor Who was coming back on our screens. So the best time to be a Doctor Who fan was at that particular moment in time. And I remember from the perspective as of that 11-year-old kid I once was. And at the time, you know, you got to put into consideration that obviously I was confused, like any other 11-year-old would be. Yes, I was into certain things, but I was never truly passionate about anything. I never really had a hobby. And then this brilliant show comes on television and just changes my life. And I always say that even though it was David Tennant that got me to love the show, I will never forget Christopher Eccleston's brilliance, because it was he and him alone that got me on board with the show. And it's funny because the way I talk about it at this particular moment in time, you know, it's a very bittersweet concept for me, speaking on in present day 2018, because Christopher Eccleston, I have noticed, if you ever look at the interviews, he has a very, not necessarily towards his fan base, he has stated on numerous occasions that he's very appreciative of the fan base that he has made or he has gathered through his tenure on Doctor Who. But whenever he talks about the show, he does come across as extremely jaded. Maybe that's just him, you know, and I'm not necessarily, please don't misinterpret me. Now, I'm not necessarily saying, you know, you should have love for the show as much as me. You know, I'm not fanboying here. But basically, maybe it's just me, but it does genuinely get to me, you know. But it just shows how much of a brilliant actor he is, because he was managed to play a character brilliantly that he's not necessarily all that keen on or not all that into. So from one perspective, I could say, yeah, this, that, and the other. But from another perspective, I just genuinely think it just shows how much of a brilliant actor he is. The story arc of the Time War. Now, depending on who you are as a viewer, I don't assume to know how much you know about Doctor Who, especially in the classic series. I hate that terminology, but I'll use it anyway. But I feel the story arc of the Time War was brilliant, very original, and to be honest with you, it was what the show needed to have that refreshed image. Now, for a lot of people, I can imagine looking at me and thinking, what's he talking about? But basically, what I mean when I say that, if you ever watched any episodes in the classic series that featured the Time Lords, it got to the extent where, whereas originally the concept of the Time Lords was meant to be this omnipotent, mysterious race, just became, eventually as time went on, they just became characters with another backstory. Similar to the Doctor's fate, we're no longer, who is this guy? Who is this person? How can this person travel through time and space? This is the Doctor. This is a 900-odd-year-old Time Lord from Gallifrey. It got to the point that the audience received so much information about a man, about a man in a show where the sole reason why it survived, or one of the particular reasons why it survives, because of its continuous nature of being mysterious, whilst also having a strong effect on keep being able to change. It was no longer a mystery anymore. It got to the point where you was knowing the Doctor's neighbours, if you don't mind, if you can understand where I'm coming from on that. So there was no mystery to the Doctor, and I felt having the Time War, just getting rid of the Time Lords completely, but not necessarily getting rid of continuity, was a brilliant idea, and I genuinely believe the Time War was a very clever concept, and it's also what helped, a very small contributing factor, but it is what helped made the show very successful as what it is today. As you've noticed, I've got 2 pages of notes here. I enjoy, now, a lot of people talk about Billie Piper, and I have noticed, especially within my generation, when it comes to Doctor Who fans or the fan base. Now, people always interpret the reason why, or why Rose Tyler is so is so celebrated, or why, you know, she's the go-to companions, to be favourite companions. A lot of people bring up, it's because of sexual attraction. Now, I'm not completely dismissing that. I'm not naive enough to believe that that's probably one of the reasons for a lot of fans out there. She's a very sexually attractive woman. But I love how Russell T Davies wrote Rose Tyler. I love the character development of that particular character. Also, you got putting into consideration from the perspective of a new audience out there that was just getting into the show. There was essentially Rose Tyler's eyes and ears. Or basically put it the other way around. Rose Tyler was the eyes and ears of the audience. When look at that episode when she's introduced to the TARDIS, when she's introduced to the Doctor, when she finds out who the Doctor is, it's exactly the same time as when the audience is introduced to these said things. You are there with Rose Tyler, you are exploring and finding out all these new things exactly the same time as her. And I've always had this theory that it subconsciously played a part in a lot of people's minds, and that's why, you know, they always go for Rose Tyler, because she was the very first person that essentially got people on board on the show. Now, I'm not necessarily saying it's because of Billie Piper's capabilities, although that being said, she is an extremely talented actress. She was the very first companion for the Doctor for a lot of people, in the same way Christopher Eccleston was the very first Doctor for a lot of people. And obviously that's going to always play a certain part of nostalgia and sentimentality, and I'm not including myself in this. Like I previously stated, season 1 for me will always have a sense of sentimentality, because it was the season that got me on board Doctor Who, like I previously stated. So that's my particular reason why I feel Rose Tyler is so popular. I love the establishing of this particular episode. I love the return of the Autons, so it's still giving a heads up to the old fans out there, and still reminding them and in a lot of sense, in a lot of aspects rather, assuring the old audience that yes, times have changed. Yes, the show's had to adapt, but this is still Doctor Who. We're going to still be doing the things that you've enjoyed. We're just going to introduce a lot of new people to it to ways they will understand, and by God, they're going to love it too. So basically, this is my first review of the revived series, Rose, and I like to give my episodes a rating out of 10. I was originally going to give this episode an 7 out of 10 rather, but as I previously recently watched this episode, I enjoyed it a lot more than I anticipated. So I'm going to give it an 8 out of 10. That's season 1, episode 1, Rose. That's an 8 out of 10. Hope you enjoyed this review, and as always, Dancing Bear out. Hopefully it'll upload this time,